second. Ms. Van Schouwen?
Here.
Mr. Phillips?
Here.
Town Council Liaison, Mr. Blazak?
Present.
Attorney Decker?
Here.
Attorney Westland? Mr. Cobb?
Here.
Mr. Arshami?
Here.
Mr. Giannotti?
Here.
Mr. Eberly?
Here.
Mr. Giannotti? That concludes roll call. Thank you.
Okay, so it appears that we have a quorum of the members present, and that would be sufficient for conducting business today. So the first item would be, would anybody like to make a motion to amend the agenda to allow for the election of a chair?
Dennis will make that motion.
Motion to amend the agenda to elect a chair.
Can you, when you make the motion, could you state your name so that the recording secretary can clearly understand?
Dennis DeVito made the motion. We do need a second, though.
I second. Kathy Van Schouwen.
Okay, so I have a motion by Dennis DeVito and a second by Kathy Van Schouwen. So all those in favor of amending the agenda to include an election of officers indicate by saying aye. But actually, Margaret, I think we have to have a voice vote, correct?
Turn on your audio, Donna.
We do need to do roll call vote because it is by
We're not hearing.
by web. We do have to do a roll call vote.
Yeah, so we have to do a roll call vote, sorry.
So, Mr. Blocker,
Yes.
Mr. DeVito,
Yes.
Ms. Vathke,
Thank you.
Ms. Vathke, if you could maybe type it in the chat if you can't get your audio to work.
You should be able to hear me now.
I hear you now. Okay. And that was a yes?
Sorry, I was distracted trying to get this to work, so I don't know where we are.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. We're taking a vote to amend the agenda to add the election of the chair, since
Okay.
our original chair had to leave.
That's yes.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Van Schouwen?
Yes.
That is all the members of the board.
Okay, so it looks like we have a unanimous vote. Okay, so now that we've amended the agenda, then the first item would be the election of a chair. Do I have any nominations for chair?
This is Dennis. I nominate Donna Fensky.
Dennis, I'm not
I
sure if
second.
you can nominate. Dennis,
Yeah.
was it you, Dennis, or Dennis, the other Dennis? How can
Dennis
be a member
DeVito.
of the advisory committee?
Dennis DeVito.
Okay, great.
You're nominating who?
Donna.
Donna Fathke?
Yes.
I second.
Who was that?
Kathy.
Kathy Van Schouwen?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a nomination and a second. Let's see, I probably should ask, Donna, do you accept the nomination?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have any other nominations? Any other nominations?
No.
Okay, hearing no other nominations, then we have a nomination for Donna Fathke. Margaret, can you do a roll call vote, please, for electing Donna Fathke as chair?
Mr. Blocker,
Yes.
Mr. DeVito,
Yes.
Ms. Vathke?
Do I vote for myself?
Yes, you can still vote.
All right, yes.
And Ms. Van Scowen.
Yes.
That concludes the vote.
Okay, so we have a unanimous vote for the election of Donna Fathke as chair, and with that, I will turn over the meeting to Donna from this point.
Okay, so I knew I should have printed out the agenda. Thanks a lot, Dennis.
You're welcome.
What's the first item on the agenda? Does somebody have one in front of them?
Typically, at this point, you would announce Tagi Arshami, the principal with Arsh Group, and then turn the floor over to him for his presentation.
Okay, so Tagi, you've got the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. This has been a journey. I think everybody hears me. Is that correct?
We are with you. Estamos com você. We want.
Is everybody hearing me, or do I need to?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Fine. Yes.
As long as you're the only one talking, we can hear you.
I'd like to take this moment to remind everybody that if you have any noise in your background, to put yourself on mute until you'd like to speak.
That's a great comment. And, yes, it does reduce, other noise. And, so I want to, let me start this. We only have 15 minutes of, process, so that's great and, great news. I want to also thank, Jason for all of his efforts. What we, let me start by thanking everybody for your patience. We had some during these difficult times. We had some glitches with notices and those things that we had to delay this meeting, but now everything's in working order. I do want to also take this opportunity to thank Brian, Councilman Brian Blazek, as well as take this opportunity to welcome Craig. This is the first official meeting that I've had with him, and I'm welcoming him to the town. We have the genesis of this presentation is due primarily to Brian's desire to start this committee with a full knowledge and understanding of what this process is and how it evolves. And I do want to congratulatively single one of you that are members of the advisory committee. I think to the credit of the council, and particularly to Brian, each one of you bring in a considerable amount of talent and experience to this process. But nonetheless, the going through this planning for this impact fee is not easy, and these presentations are not necessarily very fun because they do require your attention to fully understand it and go through it. So for that, I know Brian has been to the last one, every single one of them. So when he suggested that we should have this, I thought that this was excellent. So we are basically calling this presentation a sort of Impact Fee 101 or Introduction to Impact Fee. We are not going to discuss any of the nuts and bolts of St. John process. That will be next time. And what we call that is the existing condition or current condition presentation. That is our typical first presentation. But this one is impact fee 101. And then I'm going to go through that 40 plus slides. Please take this as a sort of lighter presentation with lots of technical information in it, and there are some legal, there are some planning, there are some process engineering, and so feel free to stop me, ask question, and ask the other participant in this, particularly on the engineering side and on the legal side. We do have two of the town's legal counsels here, so that would be great. If there are no questions, I can start. I believe it's going to take about an hour and a half, about 40 slides, but we'll see if we can expedite it. Depends on what how much conversations we're going to have. So this is our impact fee on for today's agenda. Is as I mentioned, we're going to have a small introductory information. We will present a process for the fee. We will discuss some of the legal frameworks, and we will also share with you some examples. This was specifically requested by Councilman Blazak, that we share some examples, so you know when we get to the end of this process where all of these things sort of end up. And we will answer some questions, and we will also set the next meeting date on. I neglected to say, you have seen him already. I think Denny Cobb from First School Engineering will also chime in several slides, and Jay Giannetti from our staff is also here, and he will be participating in the next presentation with the existing conditions, but at this point he's also participating in this as an observer. Let me start by defining what is the definition of the impact fee. There are several versions of it, and if you look at, depending on which side you come in, they have defined it differently. What I have on the screen, which you have received, this is from American Planning Association. This is how they define it, and that is it's a lengthy one. It's a mouthful one, but it is an assessment that's basically impose a new development for revenue and to recoup the cost of some capital improvement, and due to the impact of these developments. That's by and large a shorter version of what you have. The state law however, defines it a little bit differently. And it is important for us to sort of look at this and understand it. State law says impact fee means a monetary charge. It's an exaction, in other words, imposed on new developments by a unit to defray and mitigate the capital cost of infrastructure that is required by or necessitated by to serve the new development. So it is a monetary charge that is specifically imposed on new development. Just continuing that in terms of the basics of the impact fee, it is a one-time charge, and typically it is collected at the time of building permit, and it covers, the road impact fee covers every types of development. And I will get to the town has other types of impact fees, but I will get to it later. It is based on, the fees based on the land use type. And in other words, it is applied to all types of development, depending on the type of development. And it is a formula base calculated for each land use based on trip generation. The formula base part of it is specifically specified in the state statute, and it also is it's a prorated share of any type of capital improvements or facility development costs that is that serves that development. So what we just went through the sort of basic element of it is that it is formula based, and we will go through that development of that formula base in the future. It is based on trip generation for the road impact fee, and it is a prorated share of the total cost.
Peggy, this is Dennis. May I ask a question?
Sure.
I understand the trip generation. Is that a definition based on law, or is that definition based on practice? I mean, you just make a statement. I mean, there's a number of ways to generate a fee. Why are we selecting trip generation?
Yeah, it's a methodology, and in Indiana, there are, well, as a general rule, there are two ways for the road impact fee that they use as a unit of measurement. One is trip generation, and the other one is vehicle miles traveled. And in Indiana, typically the general practice and the law, the way it is written, it is supported that trip generation, in other words, the number of trips created or generated by a particular development, is the unit of measurements. And as I mentioned, in some other states, California, that come to my mind, they go on Florida also. I know that they use a different type of methodology to determine the miles traveled as a unit of measurement. But it is a methodology.
And that's one we are obligated to go with? Can it change?
I am not aware of anybody done that. As I said, I am aware of these two methodologies. Dennis, you can certainly chime in, but as far as I know, no.
Thank you.
for the truck generation. In Indiana, impact fees are allowed for 5 different types of what the Indiana statute calls infrastructure, and that is based on a specific statute that is called 1300 series. And so the impact fee can be applied to or used for sanitary sewer, for parks and recreational facility, road and bridges, that's where we are right now, drainage and flood control, and as well as the water treatment, water storage, water distribution. The town currently has a parks and recreation facility impact fee. So they've had them actually, St. John was the first community in Northwest Indiana to have parks fee. And if the road impact fee goes through, St. John will be the first and so far the only community that will have road impact fee. But that is, state law allows for these different types of fee, infrastructure types for the fee. The state statute allows, and this is important for you because I think we may get to it, the state statute allows that communities establish what is called an impact fee service area or impact zone. And on each impact zone, it is the maximum area that they can go is the corporate limit, and funds that are collected in that impact zone has to be spent within that service area, within that zone. And there are communities that do have less than the total area of the corporate limits as their impact zone, and that is allowed. And there has been some interest on the part of the town to perhaps look into to see whether or not we can break up or it makes sense to have what is called more than one sub area or benefit zones. Other words, there is more than one service area within the town, and that is something we're going to be working on. We're going to looking at it, and regardless, any study that we do or the impact zone has been developed, it is typically valid for 5 years, and it has to be updated at the end of that 5 years. In other words, if it is not, then the impact fee is lapsed. It goes away. And then typically for the impact zone is once it is approved by the town council, the ordinance is passed, it becomes effective 6 months after passage of or approval of the ordinance.
Kashi, this is Dennis again. That 6 months, we had at the last meeting emphasized a break point at year end, so that on the first of the year we would be consistent. Obviously, with the shutdowns here occurring, time is slipping by. Can you say a couple words about how important it would be to be on the first of the year, or if this were to be slipped a few months, would that be a problem?
Certainly, the first of the year gives you that opportunity to start each year fiscally, to start properly. The two sort of comments. Impact fee, because they're dedicated dollars, they have to be spent, and state statute has considerable amount of requirements, how they are spent, how they are mixed with other dollars, and so they are by themselves. So that's sort of one set of fiscal issue that you may face. In the case of the town, so that's not going to impact the overall town fiscal year. But there is a secondary sort of criteria that you want to make sure you start at the earliest possible, and that is you don't want to lose sort of a good chunk of development fee when the development is typically where the permits are the hottest, and that is typically early in the year rather than in the middle of the winter. So yes, you're correct. We are, our original thought was that we are going to finish this one by the middle of this year, and but it did not happen. We didn't sit necessarily idle and waiting for this. We have done a lot of work, and then he's going to talk about we were fortunate that he was able to do his initial trip survey and done before we hit the corona time. But nonetheless, we're going to expedite it as much as can to get it done. There is a process. We're going to go through it. It's just logistically, it's going to take a little bit longer.
Thank you.
Question, Dennis?
Thank you.
Okay, great. This sort of image that shows basically our service area or the impact zone, that's the most current town boundaries. And in our sort of next meeting, we will officially have this as a impact zone for the town, and you will take an action on it. Several principles that are in sort of in play for the impact fee. Those principles are, one is has to be related to the growth. The fee has to be related to the growth. We talked about it earlier, and we're going to talk about it again. And it is important for you to recognize, because every time there is a case against any impact fee, it sort of says, well, this is not a growth-related impact, or it is not proportional. So these two items often come up, particularly when it gets to the legal aspects of it. So the fee has to be proportional share of that cost of that growth. One of those principles of the impact fee is to to the concept of a level of service. And I'm going to bring Denny to talk about this a little bit more. Just what is level of service? It is A2F, and he's going to go through it next couple of slides. Then I'm going to come back. We're going to use this level of service throughout this whole process. You will hear us, you will hear Denny to talk about it. It is basically the condition of that road. Denny, you want to chime in?
Sure. As Tanya said, in order to quantify the operational characteristics of an intersection or of a section of roadway, the traffic engineering community needed to come up with some way to describe that. And so the letters of A through F were identified, and much the same as in school. If you get an A, you're doing really good, and if you're doing F, you need to have improvement. And basically, level of service A means that, and all this is based on the delay that is experienced by the automobiles going through that particular study area, whether it's an intersection or whether it's a segment of roadway. And we look at this for an intersection on the basis of each movement, like a left turn, a through movement, a right turn movement, that type of thing. And in the case of a segment of roadway, we look at it in a more of a density type of issue. But level of service A is essentially free-flowing condition, very little delay at an intersection. And as you go down through B, C, D, E, and F, your delays get worse. And Tagi's got a pretty good visual right there for you that shows as you increase in your letters the amount of congestion you see. Typically, level of service D is the lowest that you would want to design for or accept, and that's something I think we might want to discuss when we get into the existing conditions. When you have level of service A, B, or C, typically you don't schedule any improvements for this. Starting in D, you start looking at it, and definitely by the time you get to F, you want to do something because you're going to be getting complaints from the public about how much time they have to wait, how many signal cycles they have to wait, that type of thing. So basically, we'll be talking about it as we go through in the existing conditions and the future conditions, all on this concept of level of service. Any
Dennis, I have a question. Yes, Dennis has a question. I can see where the definition is going to be important. Who decides it? Who's the final authority on what a particular segment or intersection is? What level of service that might be?
We use a objective criteria to identify what those levels of service are. For intersections, it's based on the highway capacity methodology. This is the standard of the industry, and it has been developed by the Federal Highway Transportation. The level of service for segments is a little bit less uniform in its determination. The state of Florida has probably the most developed criteria for this. And I think in one of the future meetings, perhaps an existing condition meeting, Tagi, we ought to bring this information forward a little bit and discuss this as we go.
But this is subjective, or could be subjective. There's got to be some final authority. Who's the person who puts the final stamp of approval on the level of service for a particular area?
Well, there's two parts to that question. One is the determination of the level of service is an objective number, and that's a standard. what you as a committee want to accept as the lowest level of service before you deem improvements necessary is up to you. Does that answer your question?
No, it
We
doesn't
will
answer my
talk
question.
about it. Well, as Dennis said, we'll talk about that level of service, and I'm gonna get to it later on. There are some state statute requirements for how we set that level of service. And also, I think in this visual, Denny, you may want to say about the delay factors on establishing these level of service. Denny, are you?
Is that a question, Taki? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just on this visual. There is a delay there that also it is considered in setting up the level of service.
The illustration you have up on the screen identifies the amount of delay, average delay on either approach or for the intersection. And these are the breakdowns that define the level of service A through F.
Let me suggest we move on. I will address this issue later.
Yeah, feel free to give me a call.
Thank you.
Continuing those principles, as I mentioned, improvements must address the growth. Funds must be used for specific assessment area. This applies for the communities that may have more than one sort of townwide zone, and so you cannot pick up a fee from one location and apply it to another location. And there is another principle, and if you refer back to state statute, is that the fee should only pay for proportionate share when multiple sources of payments are considered. They call that equity principle, but that is that it is equitable for developers to pay what they cause, and also that they should not pay more than their fair share. And we will get this to later on when we talk about level of service. It gets a little bit complicated, but often it is other funding sources coming to play, grants, bonds, etc. And that is those. The state statute requires that if bonds are used, for example, or grants are used, those are overall impact fees prohibited for those, and that presumably a bond is a good example. Presumably the bond are paid off from future revenues that these development pay for it. Therefore, we should not charge the current developers. Again, I don't want to confuse everybody, but that is something that we will take into consideration, and you will see the calculations that we go through. There is also, in terms of principal equity, the state allows improvement in lieu of fee if a developer want to do some improvements and get credit for it, that is allowable. And often it is actually to the benefit of the town. And if an additional lane to a new subdivision has to be put in there, and the developer is already having contractor there, it is much cheaper perhaps for him to put in and get credit for in his future fees. So that is also allowable, and often the communities use that process on a case-by-case basis based on the project, and to accept that option. In terms of transportation funding, often most communities use debt, use either in the form of bond or general obligation bonds. The tax increment financing often used for transportation. Certainly impact fee is for those communities that do have that, can be used for transportation financing. And wheel tax, I know the town has, that's another option. The town in the past has discussed that. That is also available to local communities, and certainly general funds are also available. But no communities that I know of has enough general funds to address all of their transportation needs, and so they have to rely on other sources for funding. In terms of the bonds, as far as we know, there was a bond issued 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and for transportation improvement. That's the only time that the town has used bond to do that, and most of those monies went basically for resurfacing and those types of improvements for the town. And those are the things that necessarily they're not eligible for impact fee type of uses. As I mentioned, no town has enough property taxes to pay for transportation, and typically property taxes are generally used for operation and maintenance, not development of infrastructure, and typically those communities that do have impact fee, they try to use different methods to get there: right-of-way dedication, street construction, variety of types of activities that are typically used to address some of the development needs. And in all of these things, most communities try to be fair, and this process makes it in a way fair, because there is an appeal process. They say the statute requires a sort of an appeal board to be in place, and the ordinance, if this is approved, the ordinance will have a certain language for establishment of a appeals board, that each on a case by case, the developers can go and appeal the fee that has been proposed or has been calculated by Rick's office and appeal that. And that's typically is a very clear process. It is because it is based on calculations. So that's sort of background. Now let's get to talk about how these fees are typically used. They are typically used for future infrastructure to serve new development, and they can reimburse some of the cost to size a system to meet future demand. If a 3-lane road is being built, and in the future, all the indications are there that this road needs to be 4-lane, that additional sizing of that road could be paid by the fees generated by the impact fee. Some projects that do demand certain improvements, mostly on the intersections, then that is an eligible cost that often it is used for. Communities borrow, and the fee can pay for that borrowing cost. In what is important for everybody to understand that these fees are not going to be able, the town, St. John, cannot use it for operational expense or to pay for capital improvements or improvements that would correct existing deficiencies. And if the road needs new resurfacing, that is resurfacing. The easiest way to understand this, and Denny, I think, uses it all the time, feel free to chime in. The question is the project increasing the capacity one way or another? Then that is eligible. If it's not, then it becomes problematic to spend impact fees. Often these sort of eligible costs, also called recoverable cost, that's an engineering term, not mine. If it was planning, we would have called it eligible cost. But what are eligible? It is construction, certainly, planning, surveying, engineering. All of them are eligible costs. A land acquisition, you need to add a lane that is eligible, and related costs to that land acquisition. Example, as a part of an additional lane, you may have to move a drainage or a sewer line that is eligible. And any type of other planning work, financial consulting, legal, related to that is eligible. I mentioned earlier the borrowing cost is eligible cost, and local share for state and federal roadways is also, that's eligible, as long as that a state or federal roadway project is adding capacity. And this has been often, this is used, and it's important, I think, to fully understand this. We can, you will see this later on when Denny comes up with his cost estimates. You will never have enough dollars to do what you need. So you try to leverage what is available, what you have, with other funds, and those come from primarily state and federal road funds. And a lot of communities that do have impact fee, they use the impact fee for, and most of these funds, outside funds, they require some sort of match requirements, 20 to 50%. A lot of times that impact fee is used for that 20% match requirement. So in effect, the town is able to leverage $5 or $4 additional outside fund for every dollar of impact fee. Non-recoverable costs are those improvements that are not identified in capital improvement plan, and it's important, I think, to recognize, and it is a compliment, I think, to state that does put emphasis, state legislation, state statute that does put emphasis on the planning side of this, that the towns are required to have a capital improvement plan. And so anything that is in this plan, in association, the capital improvement plan, in association with the comprehensive plan, so anything that is not in this plan typically is not considered part of the future improvements.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
When does the capital improvement plan have to be completed in relation to the passage of the adoption of the impact fee?
Well, in this particular case, the town, as a part of the comprehensive plan, Denny actually did it, had a thoroughfare plan, and that thoroughfare plan works as a part of this, what we call capital improvement plan. As you know, capital improvement plan is a little bit, the term is broader. It goes beyond the roads. But in this case, the road is the work that Denny did as a part of the comprehensive plan for thoroughfares, that is sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
So non-recoverable costs, operation and maintenance costs I mentioned, those are not eligible. And improvements that are to remedy existing deficiencies, that is not eligible. So the town may have a lot of existing deficiencies, as long as they're not expanding the capacity, that's not eligible cost. And administrative operational costs of the town, that is absolutely a no-no. And also non-CIP, debt service related, that is not a eligible cost. We also
This is Dennis. May I make a question?
yes.
On improvements to remedy existing deficiencies. Can not one argue that by adding an additional development, you're making a existing deficiency worse, and therefore that would qualify under a recoverable cost?
Now I lost the video as well.
Yeah, if the question here is not that development, the impact of that development. I think the issue here is, are you addressing the needs of that development by this cost? And if you're resurfacing the road, that is not adding capacity. And but if you're widening the road or some intersection that would improve that traffic flow from that new development, yes, that becomes eligible.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Does everybody understand this sort of general, again, these are administrative issues that Craig and Rick will get involved later on, but it's good for you to understand it too. Now, what are the benefits? So this is sort of $64,000 question. Is there a benefit or it is not? But there are, and depends on who you ask. So, but generally the benefits of the impact fee is if you can raise enough dollars as well as plan for it, and development in this impact fee also, one of the side benefits of it is that you're planning for these things. That you place the infrastructure in place and to meet the development needs. So that is perhaps the biggest benefit of the impact fee. You can also direct the development or direct the growth in a way that is most beneficial to the town. Right? It's sort of the old saying: you put the road, and people are going to come. And so if you you expand in certain direction, you can guide patterns of development, future development. You can also promote cost-effective development, reduce cost of it because you're planning ahead. We often we talked about grants and loans and those things. So if there are some grants that come along and you have the money to match it, you can. That's a reduction to the overall development. It also one of the other things. It's sort of often it is under appreciated is so. It's a promote long-term financial stability of the communities. Although there is no guarantee that the town is going to get the same amount of funds, but I think it is over a 5-year period, 5-year time. You can project, and we will give you that projection, that there will be potentially some level of financing available or some level of dollars available for the next 5 years that you can plan for. So it does give more stability to the town to plan for and conduct operation in that fashion.
This is Donna. I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, my understanding is these impact fees are levied when the builder comes in to get a permit to build. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. How would you then use the money to direct growth patterns if the development is already underway by the time you collect the fees?
Right. Yeah, there is a lag in there. But if the road is expanded over the next 5 years, this road that let's say goes in front of development, that development is going to benefit from it. It's not just that moment, but it would be over the years the development will benefit. The residents that go there will benefit from this once the road is fully improved and operational. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of kind of a neck and neck kind of situation.
Good.
But yeah, I think I get your point. Thanks.
One other benefit is that, and I think this is probably the most applicable to the town of St. John, to reduce the tax impact or the impact of the traffic on the current taxpayers. The concept is basically you are making the future taxpayers pay for the future impact, and rather than current taxpayers, and so that's one of the other benefits. One other benefit is, again, it is often not fully appreciated, is that there is substantial amount of benefit is gained when the right sizing is done at the right time. If the road or a sewer needs to be put in there, that would allow for future larger development or larger impact, then there is a substantial amount of benefit from that, or efficiency from that, doing the work at that time rather than a later time. There are some costs also, and this is what the developers often bring up, and that is that adds the fee adds to the cost of development. That is true. Today's cost of development, and every residential building that has been put up, if they have to pay additional money to for that building permit, then that's an added cost to the development, and there is higher development cost. Sort of forces higher value for the real estate, and that means a higher rent for the developers, and if the rent is not there, then they become concerned, and so that's another issue, and all of this will result in the market. The developer argue that the market is not there, and is not going to support it. The people in the case of St. John, one could easily argue that people can go to Sherrville or can go to Cedar Lake and build rather than St. John. And that's one of those things that you're going to have to, by the fact that you're there, you're going to have to discuss it when we get to the end of this process in your recommendation to the town council. Where is that balance? What is that balance? We are going to move on to a sort of another leg of this whole thing, and get into the legal authority of the impact fee and the basis for it. And law is always impacting everything we do, particularly in the planning area. In the case of impact fee, the cases that I am aware of, and I do want to welcome both of our attorneys, if they're still there, to chime in. We do not, often in all of our other works, we do not necessarily play this much emphasis on the law, but for this case, for the impact fee, it is the reason we put emphasis because the town collects the fee, goes and spends it. And we had a case in Zionsville. And in 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, somebody comes in, challenges it, and if the town loses, for whatever reason, the town may be required to pay everybody back. And so it is, becomes critical that not only we go through this process very, very diligently, everything we do is fully documented, and also to make sure that we are legally on the sound footing in terms of that process and development of this study. Nonetheless, the authority of the impact fee is at the federal level. There is connections between land use, or it is considered part of the land use regulations, and all development exemptions are that way, and as such, they are subject to the Fifth Amendment prohibition of taking. And those of you that have served on Plan Commission, you hear that term taken all the time, and so that is where we are concerned about. And the Fifth Amendment, often it is quoted that it is required that any type of exaction must advance a legitimate government interest, and that is part of this Fifth Amendment, and that interest often it is to protect the public health and safety and welfare, and that's sort of the basis of that legitimate interest. And the courts there are two well-known cases. Those of us that are in the planning field, we often hear it. Nolan and Dolan case, and in both of these cases went to the Supreme Court, and one is the Nolan case basically says there has to be some essential, what they call it, essential nexus, connection between that fee and this legitimate interest or expanding welfare, health, and safety of the community. That is one case, and the other case is involves and I guess this is an example of that level of service that Denny was talking about. That it has to be roughly proportional. The fee or the exaction has to be roughly proportional to the amount of burden that a development creates, and that burden means the impact for us. I don't know if any of our two councils want to add anything to this. Is that I think I've talked more than I would like to get involved in the legal fields.
This is Adam Decker. I can just add a little bit to that last point that you made. Those two cases that were up to the United States Supreme Court, the first one was Nolan versus California Coastal Commission, which was a 1987 decision, and then the second case, Dolan versus City of Tigard, which was a 1994 decision. So those are those are decisions that have been on the books for quite some time. In Nolan, the Supreme Court held that a government could, without paying compensation, demand an easement as a condition for granting a development permit that the government was entitled to deny, provided that the exaction would substantially advance the government interests that would furnish a valid ground for denial of the permit. So I know there's a lot to wrap up in that. The court further refined that requirement in the Dolan case, which was the 1994 decision, and that's the roughly proportional test. So that in Dolan, the court held that an adjudicative exaction requiring dedication of a private property must also be roughly proportional, both in nature and extent, to the impact of the proposed development. So those two cases basically have formed the basis by which the court reviews, the Fifth Amendment takings challenges. And so I think those two cases, if ever there was going to be a challenge of any impact fees that would be created by the town of St. John, I think we can presume that those two cases might be referenced by the legal counsel that might be seeking to challenge that.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's look at the state level. The state level is, I think it is less complicated, but nonetheless, it is supporting the same, somewhat the same issues at the federal level. The state law, that 1300 series, establishes the process and the method for adoption of impact fee, and it is very specific and requires certain methodology and certain activities to be done that we do as we go through this process. The state law, however, requires a couple of other things that has to be done. One is the chief executive of the local entity must appoint an advisory committee, and that's where you are. And the state statute requires development of a infrastructure improvement zone plan. That is what we or establishment of a zone, and then developing a plan for that zone, what we call the zone improvement plan, and that is the impact fee study that we are doing. That's part of our work. The state statute also add something that says it has to be a reasonable impact for that activity or development, and that reasonableness is very important to us, and as we go through this process. And as I mentioned earlier, the question of the fairness and the case-by-case scenario, the state statute also requires appointment of a review board that could appeal any fee that has been calculated by the town and review that. So the impact cost in a state statute is it's a reasonable estimate, and I think that gives us a substantial amount of you know, latitude in determining how the fee is developed and what is a reasonable amount. And but nonetheless, we want to be very cognizant of that process that we go through. The proportionate part of the federal also comes in the state, and it has to be proportionate share of the cost incurred by the local agency in providing that infrastructure. And the sort of last part of this is the amount of impact cost may not include the cost of infrastructure that is needed to raise the current level of service. Danny mentioned or brought up those A through F level of service and how we determine what this one is, in effect says that if you currently have a level of D, you cannot expect a developer to provide or to pay for an infrastructure that will render a level of A performance. And so that doesn't mean that the town cannot improve the level. It just makes the stuff a little bit more complicated. And we will talk about it later on. But nonetheless, it is by the state statute, we're going to have to maintain that level of service, or we should not expect developers to pay their fair share. That is what is already there. Does everybody understand this?
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, great. And again, the last item here, the state statute does say your role is an advisory. What does that mean? That means you will, at the end of this process, you will you will communicate your process, what you have gone, and you are making a recommendation to the council, and they will. It is not necessarily that the council doesn't need necessarily accept that full recommendation, because your role is advisory. We talked about the local level, and we talked about the park impact fee. The town, at the local level, the town does have a park impact fee, and this would be a second impact fee that the town will have. The park impact fee actually was renewed last year, and just for your information, the advisory committee, I think from your committee, Vince is the only one that was on that committee. Is that right, Vince? No? That advisory committee recommended a 60%, I believe 60, maybe 62% rate of what was calculated to the council, and council accepted that rate. Let me move on to sort of what is the assessment process. How do we go to assess an impact fee? And the impact fee, it is a comprehensive process of evaluating, in effect, consequences of development in the community and it is part of that planning process for the community to support the general plan or the comprehensive plan and zoning code of the town. There are several steps that we go through this, and you're going to go through it with us. And these steps consist of a series of initial analysis to determine future growth and future traffic. That is based on a 10-year horizon, and as a part of our work would be to also determine what percentage of that the trip generated over the next 10 years can be attributed to the growth, and determine the cost to address those sort of needs, and divide the two by each other, and determine a cost per trip, and then develop a fee schedule that Rick, the planning department, will then use as a basis to charge those fees. It is a methodical process, and we will start with determining what the future growth is, which is what is the future population, what is the future number of residentials, and a significant amount of work in terms of determining what is available to develop for the future. And Jay has been working with Rick for the last month and a half, I think. Jay probably knows every single vacant lots in the town, where they are, and in order to identify where future growth can come from, and we will discuss those in our next meeting. But that is the process that we will go through.
Tagi, a question?
Yes.
Can anticipated annexations be used for calculations? No. The easy answer is no. The state statute, however, allows that any future annexation is incorporated into the impact fee or impact zone process. So it is not that they will be excluded, but we cannot. Well, if you're using 10-year forecasts, a lot of those forecasts are going to project beyond the current town limits.
We don't know. We are bound by the impact zone. We cannot go beyond the corporate boundaries of the town, although future development, nor does the town permit any future development outside the town. But nonetheless, the statute allows that once an area is incorporated, then they have to pay for the impact fee. And presumably, the town will also start investing in those areas for all kinds of infrastructure.
Thank you.
Danny, this is more on your side. Did you want to chime in on this sort of terms of process? So, Danny? We didn't lose Danny, did we? Can you hear me, Danny?
It's hard to tell. Can anybody call or text him?
Kathy Van Scowen.
Well, let me go ahead and this is basically what is the process for determining the cost, the transportation cost, different steps for Denny that will go through that, and that is number one is determine what is the existing traffic volume. That's already been done, and typically that's average daily trips. Determine the existing level of service. We talked about the A2F. I mean, and then establish the level of service or the preferred level of service and of existing situation, and determine the needs to meet the desired level of service over a 10-year period. Again, if a level of service today is D over a 10-year period, what does that mean with this additional development going through, and then cost these future improvements. Separate, this is an important one, separate the costs that are the result of the existing deficiencies versus costs that can be easily connected to the future growth. And that is what's called the capacity deficiency, and assign that. And once that cost is narrowed down, then we already know what the trip generated trips are, and then divided the two, and that would become a cost per service unit or per trip.
Tagi, can I ask a question? It's Craig.
Yes.
In all of this, and in the previous study, and in all of this conversation, and all the steps that we have to go through, and the information we have to collect, with the exception of a small handful, let's just say, of larger parcels that are left within the town boundaries, the future growth area of St. John is all to the south, largely all to the south of 109th. Will this new effort that we're going through now take into account those growth areas? Because it's my understanding that as we annex, we continue, that the impact zone automatically includes those, or can be developed in a way so that it includes those areas. So the majority of the growth area of St. John over the next, let's just say a couple decades, is going to be largely south of 109th, with the exception of a few areas on the east and a few areas on the west. But I wanted to ask about that, because that's something that jumps out at me immediately, is that there's a 2-mile swath basically that runs from the state line over to roughly Klein, I believe, that is kind of our growth boundary, if you will, according to our comprehensive plan. And so I wanted to ask how this current effort that we're going through takes that into account.
Is Danny there? Danny, if he's there still, he can chime in. What he does when he does the traffic analysis, He also adds what he calls the regional traffics. And those, the way I understand it, is consists of the traffic that will be potentially coming in the future, as well as the current traffic that is people from that area outside the town that come in through the town, particularly in the case of St. John, though. Certainly 109th as well as 41 those are the two corridors that do attract those. So he takes into consideration or separates those traffics, regional traffics, what we call. To the extent that I think future both could be considered. We have done that in the past. In the last one, there were several known developments that we knew. There was a school and some other developments that we knew of, and we took those. I believe we took those into consideration. We will not know for sure for everything, but our future land use projection does include a potential future land acquisition or land annexation into the mix of things.
Okay, because one of the reasons I ask about this too is I know that the town is very interested in exploring the possibility of an additional east-west connection to 394 somewhere to the south of 109th, and I know we're discussing, either 117th or 125th as potential options for that, and working with Lake County and Will County to eventually have those conversations about, thinking forward, so we don't get caught up in the same situation we have with, Exchange Street, for example. Among other things, I think that's why we need to take those kinds of things in consideration with this. So that's why I asked about that. I think we need to explore that further. So we can talk about more about that later, but I just wanted to bring that up for consideration.
I just want to make sure that you and everybody understand that if it is, that's what this plan relies on what is on the comprehensive plan and what is on your thoroughfare plan. If it is not in there, legally, literally, we cannot say let's include that.
Correct, and I understand that, and I think that I understand the process for updating and revising that as well, so.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. This is basically, it's a graphic here we have. It's based on the analysis, very simple, that the trip generation of a new office building, 50 come, 150 go, and that is the peak hour traffic generations or trip generation for this particular office building proposed, and we use that. I was hoping that Denny would talk about these. These are all sort of last study that we did, existing traffic, and sort of simplifies in a very graphic form where the focus of condition analysis was in the last study, and the same. This was road section of it. But we will go through this, these next, in our next meeting, with all of the data, that you could ever imagine. So that's the traffic. I'm gonna speed it up a little bit. Service unit. Typically, we have, we have to be able to devise a measure that we can measure things and say, okay, this is, and analyze the impact. Typically, this is driven by your number of, earlier I mentioned, number of traffic generated from different types of uses, and in these different types of units, each one's called a service unit, and the common term that is used is what's called the EDU, and that is equivalent dwelling unit. And that's a mouthful, but it comes from a state statute. And it is, each EDU consists of either a one single family residential unit or 1,000 square foot or feet of non-residential uses. That is a unit of measurements. You will hear us to talk about the EDU over next couple of presentations, but that is the basis of it. I want to make sure everybody understands that. So it is a connection of a type of land use with the traffic. And this is a good graphic of it. And a single family residential unit is one EDU, and a townhouse, a 2-unit townhouse is a 2 EDU. A 15,000 square foot medical office is 15, and a convenience store with 3,200 square feet is a 3.2 service unit. I want you to remember this image because we're going to use it later on. And as far as the transportation planners or traffic analysis, these are different things that have different implications. And so that's how the service unit, equivalent dwelling unit, is identified. And for these different uses, we cannot analyze for 700 plus different units that or types of development that exist. And so Institute for Traffic Engineers come up with a table that you see there, that they have identified different types of land uses, and then assign at the national level, assign not only a unit for it based on the national averages of traffic. They also provide us with that guidance that we cannot determine or a town of St. John cannot determine on a case-by-case basis. So we will be using this table as a guide to determine what the future factor is in terms of the traffic. Let me just show you this.
'Cause
single-family detached housing unit is classified as one EDU. And in comparison with that, these are again national level. In comparison with that is for the low-rise apartment, the number of traffic generations that comes out of an apartment building is 0.058 of a single family dwelling unit. So that is something we will be using in the past of our completion of the project, but Rick will be using to determine that fee. This is another example of what that fee or what that traffic impact would be. A convenient market, for every 1,000 square foot of that, you're looking at 52.41 EDUs. Other words, for 1,000 square foot of a convenient market, you're gonna generate 52 times more traffic than a single family home. So these are the numbers. We're going to get to it later on, but that is something for you to be aware of. I'm going to move on for this recap, and now I've talked about enough, I think, about how to determine the impact, trip generations, number of new trips generated, and also what is the character of that trip. Craig, you were talking about some of the cars coming out of the region. That is the character we're going to talk about. And then the factors that will be considered will be capacity of that road, the cost of those improvements, and what we establish as the level of service. The calculation is, I've mentioned this, it has a 10-year horizon. It is that proportional share of capacity needed for the growth. It is based on the level of service established early on. And so impact fees are updated every 5 years. And it is, again, relates to the capital improvement plan or a thoroughfare plan in our case, and the comprehensive plan. In effect, the maximum impact fee per service unit is the recoverable cost of growth impact divided by new service units or the number of trips. Does everybody understand this part? I want to make sure that we don't lose this. We got the total growth impact divided by number of trips created by that growth. That gives us the maximum impact fee per service unit. Do I have everybody?
Yes.
I guess there is.
I'm still here.
No news and good news.
Here too.
Again, this is another part of my efforts to be a good teacher. I'm repeating myself again. So number of new trips. These are all related in terms of determining what the trip rate is or what the cost of that trip is. So we have the number of new trips, improvement needed to address those new trips, and cost of those improvements, that gives us cost per new trip. Okay, now, so an example, I want to make sure that Brian wanted to have something like this for me to discuss, so I'm going to go slow and hopefully go through it. If you don't understand it, don't worry about it. We're going to go through these probably 3 meetings later on when we have all of these datas. And but basically cost of all of the future improvements and divided by growth related trips, that gives us the cost per trip. So if it is, let's say, plan improvements involve road intersection, let's assume that cost is 200, and as a result of that, we're going to new services that will be, or number of service units that will be generated, consists of residential, commercial, industrial. Let's say 30 of them come from residential, 60 of them come from commercial, and 10 comes from industrial. That's a total of new trips. That's 100, and the cost per trip would be $2. 200 divided by 100. Everybody's okay with this? Are we clear?
Yes. That one calculation is pretty straightforward. Hopefully we have that much.
You don't want to go back to the one before, is that right? No? Is that what you said?
No, I'm fine. I'm assuming everybody else is, or they'd be speaking up. Speak now, forever keep your peace.
This is, I think, going a little bit beyond the impact fee 101. Maybe it becomes impact fee 102 or 201. This basically shows very graphically or very simplified version of what that cost per trip involves. Should I move on?
I'm good with that.
I guess it is. Now, this is more for eventually Rick is going to get to this one, this example. A development comes in with 20 units. What those units are, who knows? It could be 20 single family home, or a combination of different types of homes and commercials. But what we have is it generates 20 units. And so the impact fee for this particular development would be the number of EDU, which is 20, and a net trip cost per EDU. That is either the one or some other number that we have calculated. So if we use the last number of $2, that is the impact fee would be $40 for this 20 units. Okay. Now on this calculation, now this is, we get to the yellow part of it. That's how we arrived on that 40 unit. It says that the single family or commercial units total were 20. And we had previously calculated the net cost per EDU was $2. And the growth cost is the total cost of all the improvements. In this case was $160. But what we have assigned, we have determined that $60 of those costs were addressing deficiencies, existing deficiencies. Therefore, the total growth-related cost was 100. And so the total estimated growth therefore becomes 50. 100 divided by 50 gives you the $2. Did I lose everybody?
Where did that 50 come from?
That is the estimated growth. The gross cost divided by new EDUs, that's the number of new EDUs, and that is 50 we have estimated. Keep that in mind. The 20 units that we have they are, I think the next slide will show better. They are 20 units, but they are not generating all as one trip.
Tagi, I think, one thing that's throwing me off a little bit is $200 obviously is not the cost of, a road improvement or an intersection improvement. Part of it is, I guess, that we have to try to do the math in our heads of trying to apply, real costs of a project to this. It becomes a lot more, becomes a lot more realistic. So 200 could be 200,000 or
2 million.
2 million, depending on what the project is.
Right. Yeah,
So
and this is not intended for you to understand these things, but it is intended for you to understand the process that determining these developments could be complicated, and that's why it is also on a case-by-case basis.
I think the net cost and the cost per EDU and the growth, I think that it is confusing. I'm not sure. I think I understand EDUs. Okay, the net cost per EDU. Yeah, again, if we were using numbers more reflective of realistic, project costs of just a illustrative project cost, it might be easier to kind of grasp. I don't know. Does anybody else agree with me?
Tagi, I think that we've gone down the road and now it's starting to get tiring because we've been at this for a couple hours. I suggest we kind of wrap this up and plan a meeting in, say, 2 weeks and start again, because I think you've about lost everybody's possibility to keep the attention span.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think Brian, you've been in some of our meetings. I get accused that I'm talking too much because I repeat myself, and you've seen it. Next meeting, we're going to have a sort of abbreviated version of this again to go over, and we can start with Prash with that one. So let's move on. I think I have just a couple more slides left. A simpler version of the last slide is I've got a 10,000 square foot medical building. The the trips based on that ITE schedule that I showed earlier says it is 28 trips per 1,000 square feet. Therefore, it gives me 283 trips for this. That's what the number of trips that this facility will generate. And assume that we have calculated $200 road impact fee per trip. The impact fee for this new building, if it is $200 rate per trip, will be $56,000. This is what they have to come up with for this particular building at this particular rate. And then, by the way, that is the rate that I didn't just pull it out. That is the rate for the town of Noblesville, the $200 for that type of use. So that building, they have to come up. The building permit would be about $56,000.
Let me see if I'm following this okay. Because ITEs are evening rush hour, basically, right?
Right.
PM peak hour. So this fee that we are determining is it's a peak hour impact fee. Is that correct?
No, that is one item that they look at for the capacity needs. But the way I understand it is the average daily traffic, 24 hours. That is the basis for the number of trips. There are two different things we're talking about here.
Right.
I think the average daily trips, that's what you see. The peak hour traffic, that is for the capacity determination. That's
Well, what is the 28.34? Isn't that a peak hour?
No, that's the average daily trip. No,
Oh, okay. All right. Never mind.
I'm glad that you're asking though. That's great. So we have this. So basically, once we get through this process, you will have, as an advisory committee, you will have a chance of, or options of, to recommend 100%, a percentage of it, a graduated rate. We will discuss these methodologies for imposition of this with you, and that is basically one of your most important part of your recommendation and justification for whatever recommendation you will make. There is always a difference between maximum and actual impact fee. Maximum you're going to determine as a part of this process. The actual will be determined by the town council, and you will get some pushback from some folks, and so that is the process for later on. In most of the impact fees, public uses are typically exempt, and so if there is a school, they're not going to pay that. Let's get back to that, to the one that we saw earlier in terms of the service unit. This is exemplify what the land use is and what the trip generations are. And a single family home generates typically 9.5 trips per day. And for a townhouse, the same townhouse we saw earlier with 2 EDU now generates about 12 trips. A the same 15,000 square foot building generates, office building generates 53. This is what's most important, and it does have planning implications. Do you really want to have a convenience store on some corner of some street when it generates that huge amount of traffic when you don't have capacity? And these are the things that planning commissions really need to discuss and consider as they go and permit these developments. Second, another sort of graphic showing land use versus trip generation. A Chick-fil-A, which generates 50 times more than a single family home, and it also generates 15 times more than a medical office building. And if you are using public transportation, there is no traffic generation. These are some of the planning implications that the town will have to consider as they go through their planning process. Again, summary, we went through this. Predictable for developers, consistent fee structure in terms of future planning, and it is it's a established and tested approach, and then it is it could be very flexible to address some of the traffic issues. Again, we talked about the con for that. That is sort of my end of my presentation, but the next step in this process will be to go through that you as advisory committee will go through this process. After that, we'll go through the planning commission. And they have plan commission, they have the responsibility to determine the consistency of the road impact fee with the comprehensive plan and the thoroughfare plan. And that is what their role will be. And then the town council will review the whole thing and adopt it or not adopt it. Right now, as of today, or as of a couple of weeks ago, we have 4 communities in Indiana that have road impact fee, and these are the trip cost for their fees, and for their single family home, that's the range that you see among these communities. And that's the presentation. I really appreciate your patience. I went over a little bit more, but hopefully we'll stay with us. So next time. We will be discussing demographics. We will be discussing existing conditions, land use, as well as a lot of information about transportation that Denny has collected. I don't believe next time we will get to the impact per unit of service, and we'll try to keep it to less than 40. So it's not become too much. That's my presentation. Any questions?
Yes, I do have a question. In the slide presentations that you sent out to us, there was one slide that mentioned Indiana code for this. I see 36-7-4-1300. If we wanted to go to Indiana code for reference for any of this, is that will we find it all in that area, or do you want to give us a different citation?
If you go on the state, state website, state legislature website, just, you see on top of it, you put that number in there, it'll show up.
And that'll give us the whole thing?
It will give you, it's not a separate item by itself. The whole section shows up, but you will see the 1300 series started somewhere there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's like 30 some pages.
Good bedtime reading then, is what you're
Yeah.
saying, right? Okay.
This is Dennis. I have an administrative question.
Yes.
Would it be possible to get a roster, emails and phone numbers of the committee? And separately, I'm not sure who's actually participates as a committee member and who's participating as an advisor or an observer. Would that be possible to get that information?
Yes, that's a good point, Dennis. I was thinking
Yes.
the same thing. We need to do that, so.
Yeah, the committee members are 5.
Margaret, would you put the list together? You know basically what everybody's looking for, who all the participants are, and what their capacity is.
Thank you.
I can send that out after the meeting, sure.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you very much.
I also encourage next meeting quickly. I'll forget a lot in 2 weeks.
And that's on the agenda. That's what we need to determine at this point, is how often we want to meet. Brian, are we still trying to hit a target of having this all accomplished
I
by
sure
the first
would.
of the year?
Yes, I'm still shooting for it, but, the pandemic getting in the way, we can still push.
Well, that would
I'm up
actually mean,
for-
though, that we need to get this to the planning committee before the end of well before, because it has to go through 2 more stages before it
We gotta
actually.
get into June. Basically. So if you people decide amongst yourselves, I think 2 weeks at a maximum. And if you want to go a week, that's fine too. Next Thursday, same time, same back. No.
The week
I
is
support
gonna be a
next
little
week.
bit
This is Dennis.
short. Brian, I know Danny is not here. The next meeting, we will be discussing, on our part, we will be discussing all of the demographics and all of the land use information that Jay has been collecting. We should be done with
That you
those.
just generated.
Did you say something? I didn't hear you.
Why don't, since he's got
Yeah.
all the information that's been generated latest. Therefore, maybe you ought to check with them and see what the next earliest possible date for them to be present at.
That's
And
what
we
I
don't
was
want a
thinking,
long
that
time.
Danny would- Yeah,
Well, and I would like to make a suggestion at this point, since each of our meetings will probably be fairly technical, and we'll have to do a lot of remembering from one meeting to the next, that I think perhaps we ought to start out at least meeting once a week, until we get our feet on the ground on this and get our arms around it better. What do the other committee members feel about that?
Dennis agrees.
but we cannot, this is the logistics of this stuff. We have to generate this information. And, as I mentioned, for next week, for next meeting, because of the delay, we feel comfortable that in a couple of weeks, we should be, we should be good enough to go for existing condition. I want to confirm that with Denny and see if he has analyzed his initial data that he has collected. This is
Tagi, this is Denny. Yes, in 2 weeks, I can be ready to present the results of the existing conditions analysis with the additional data, traffic data that we collected.
if you're ready, then I think 2 weeks. Jay, I know he's still working with Rick. Jay, feel free to chime in. We still got some issues that needs to be solved in terms of the land use. And this corona thing has not only delayed everybody, makes it much, much more difficult to sit down in one meeting in 2 hours and go over everything. It has to be done by phone and different things. So it is, if we can have Jay, are you still online, Jay?
Yes, I'm still here. It's
Others, are you going to be done in 2 weeks with, and all of those need to be mapped, which we haven't even done it yet. Are you going to be done in 2 weeks with all of the land use, growth related land use issues?
I believe I can be or will be. It's
Okay. If that is the case, I think is Thursday good day for everybody. Let's start from there.
I think, yeah, we ought to just push 2 weeks ahead.
So that'll be 2 weeks. That'll be May 21st.
That would be May 21st is correct.
The same time, the same place.
Yes, same time. And who knows where we're gonna be, but for now, it's gonna be the same place.
Right.
Will Jason send out a meeting notice?
We will, yeah, I will send a meeting notice out with the agenda and,
Margaret. can-
And
Margaret can-
Tagi, work with Jason to send out the invite for the web meeting.
If
Okay,
I could,
no problem.
if I could interject, I will get the meeting notice ready and I will send that to Jason and to Beth so that it gets published. And at that point, Jason will go ahead and set up the meeting. And also, Tagi, for the agenda, you will need to have approval of minutes on the next one, I believe, as well as roll call. We have to have those on the agenda.
good call. Okay. Good suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I
everybody.
have
Wonderful.
Well, I have one concern here, in that, yes, I realize that technically we won't be ready to meet for another 2 weeks. However, I would like the committee to meet at least on an informal basis, if that's possible, more to get to know what each other's abilities are like and to see if there are any concerns amongst the members about items that they would like to see addressed more, perhaps. And because I know a couple of people on the committee. I don't know everybody. Certainly people would like to get to know backgrounds of each other a little bit better. That takes up valuable time at a technical meeting that the rest of you all may or may not be interested in. I don't know, but I would like to have a meeting next week just to talk about any issues that the members may have.
Is that legal? Adam Decker?
Yeah, I don't know what kind of legal constraints the committee is under as far as meeting.
Brian,
Adam,
Brian, I don't see
Go ahead.
Adam, I don't see Adam's name anymore, so he may have had to have stepped off the call.
Margaret, are you still online?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Adam appears to have stepped off the call or off the webinar. I don't see his name in the participant list. I don't know if this would fall under an executive session or if this would be a noticed meeting that would have to be noticed and be available live stream and public. So we may want to just go ahead and check in on that with Adam after the meeting and set that up after that, if that's okay with you. I don't want to give ill advice.
Agreed.
Yeah,
We will not have anything to say if there is a meeting next week. Although it would be good to get to know everybody, all the advisory board members. But we are not going to be presenting.
correct. I understand
So,
that. It's just
then
that
why- yeah,
this is
then
the
why-
first time a lot of us members are meeting, and we're just trying to get our feet on the ground. I know I am. I was not expecting to be chair. But, if we could meet informally, that would be great. I have a feeling we may not be able to, seeing as we're, a formal committee, but, I would like to meet at least for a short period of time next week, even though it will not be a technical meeting.
We'll get Adam to read out on that.
Okay, that would be good. I mean, I'd love to have a conversation with him if he wants to give me a call.
Sure.
Also now, who on the technical difficulties that we had today, is Jason the person to talk to about how we might address some of those issues?
Yeah.
Okay. Can we stay on the line afterwards and talk about some of the things that came up? I don't want to keep everybody here for it.
Donna, this is Craig. I don't know if Jason is on the line still. He got us set up for the call, and I'm handling the,
Okay.
I'm handling the stopping
I'm here.
recording and all that stuff. I just want to let you guys know that I have another meeting here in the meeting room at Town Hall at 12:30. So I need to, have you guys wrap it up by then so that I can go to that meeting.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to stop this recording so that I can start the 12:30 meeting that I have here at 12:30.
Jason, can I get with you offline?
Oh, Jason is here, okay.
Yeah, he just said something.
Yes.
Can, you want to give me a number I can call you at?
Instead of Jason doing it in the meeting, I can email it to you, Donna.
That's fine. That's fine.
I think we need to adjourn this meeting if we are done.
Somebody make a motion to adjourn.
This is Dennis, I move we adjourn this meeting.
Need a second?
This is Doug, I second it.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and I will see you in 2 weeks.